The lawyer didn't raise his voice, he didn't slam a folder down, he didn't do anything dramatic. He simply tilted his head toward my ex-husband and said something so quiet I didn't catch it. But I saw what it did. Mason Hale, the man who had spent 16 years perfecting the art of winning rooms, stopped breathing like he'd forgotten how. His jaw tightened, then loosened. He blinked too many times. His fingers, which had been tapping with bored impatience on the conference table, curled into a fist and started shaking. And me. For the first time in a long time, my face betrayed me. I smiled. Not big, not smug, just a small, private smile that said, "Oh, so you finally read it." But I'm jumping ahead. You need the before because the before is how people mistake quiet for weak. The before is how a woman can look like she's losing while she's actually setting the board. My name is Mara Ellison. I'm 35, and 3 months ago I stopped being Mrs. Mason Hale. I met Mason when I was 18 and he was 25. I just started working at a mid-size accounting office, mostly scanning receipts, chasing signatures, learning how to smile at men who thought sweetheart was a professional title. Mason walked in wearing a suit that cost more than my car. He had that kind of confidence that doesn't ask permission. He talked to the owner like they were equals, joked with the receptionist like he was doing them a favor, and he looked at me like I was a detail he could file away. He was there for one reason: funding. He had a plan to build a property management company that would streamline rentals and increase returns. It was all clean phrases and sharp teeth. He didn't say he wanted to be rich, he said he wanted control. We started dating fast, not because he was romantic, he wasn't, but because he was certain and I was tired of uncertain everything. When you grow up counting quarters, certainty looks like safety. We married when I was 20. People like to say we built it together about businesses. Here's the truth: Mason built a brand, I built a machine. I handled invoices, payroll, contracts, vendor payments, tenant disputes, bookkeeping, scheduling, and the kind of relationship maintenance nobody applauds. Apology emails, last-minute gifts, smooth words to angry clients. Mason did lunches, I did the numbers. Mason shook hands, I cleaned up after the handshake. We had our son Eli when I was 21. I went part-time for a while, then stopped working outside the house entirely because Mason said it made sense. "You're better with operations," he told me. "I trust you." What he meant was, "You're useful in the shadows." For years, I told myself this was partnership, that being needed was its own kind of love. But something changes in men who start to believe they are the reason the sun comes up. Mason began making decisions without telling me. He treated my questions like criticism. He treated my help like obligation. He started staying out later. At first, I didn't accuse. I just noticed patterns. The extra cologne, the sudden gym obsession, the phone face down on the counter, the way he left the room to take calls. Then the comments started. "You should dress nicer. Why don't you do something with your hair? You're always tired. You used to be more fun." I was running a household, raising a kid, and managing the back end of his entire company. But sure, I should be more fun. The divorce announcement arrived on a Tuesday. Of course it did. Tuesdays are for chores. Mason always liked delivering bad news on days that didn't feel special. He came home, didn't kiss me, didn't ask about dinner, and sat at the kitchen island like he was about to review quarterly earnings. "I'm done," he said. "I want a divorce." I didn't speak immediately because my brain tried to protect me by refusing to process the sentence. He continued like the silence meant permission. "I'm keeping the house, I'm keeping Hale property, the vehicles, the accounts, you can take the kid." "Oh, the kid. Not our son, not Eli, the kid." He said it casually as if he was being generous, letting me keep the responsibility while he kept the rewards. I stared at him across the granite countertop I had picked, the backsplash I had argued for, the kitchen I had cleaned 1,000 times while he took calls in the driveway. "Why?" I managed. Well, he shrugged. "It's better this way, you'll be fine, you're organized." Organized like I was a label maker, not a person. The next morning, his mother arrived. Claudia Hale had the kind of polished smile that never reached her eyes. She walked through my front door like she owned it, glanced around and said, "Well, at least you'll have a fresh start." Then she put her hand over mine, squeezing as if she were doing me a kindness. Men need to feel appreciated, she added softly. You must have let the spark die. I almost laughed. Claudia had been married to a man who lived at his lake house 9 months out of the year. But she came to blame me, that was her hobby. Within days, Mason began moving me out of my life in small, cruel edits. My closet got reduced. We should separate, he said, as if the divorce paperwork wasn't already a guillotine. My credit card stopped working. We need boundaries, he explained. And then, like he was staging a play, he introduced the understudy. Her name was Sloane, 28, worked at his company. Of course she did. She walked into my kitchen wearing a fitted blazer and a bright smile like she was auditioning for new wife. She didn't apologize for existing, she acted like she'd been invited. Mason brought her around on purpose, not because he loved her, because he loved what it did to me. He wanted me small. He wanted me frantic. He wanted me begging to negotiate. I didn't. Because 3 years earlier, on another Tuesday, I had found something inside the company books that didn't belong. A payment schedule that didn't match the loan agreements. Transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. A second mortgage I'd never signed. Then a third. I stayed up until 2 a.m. printing statements with my hands shaking so hard I kept feeding the paper crooked. And I realized something that night. Mason wasn't wealthy. He was floating. And he was floating on debt so heavy it should have pulled us under. That's what people didn't know while they watched my life fall apart. They didn't know that while Mason was packing his confidence, I was packing evidence. They didn't know that while he was planning to take everything, everything had a price tag. And the bill was coming due. By the time Mason asked for a divorce, I had been living with two realities for 3 years. Reality one was the life we showed. The house with the white porch columns, the holiday photos, the company dinners where Mason clinked glasses and promised growth. Reality two was what I saw at my desk after everyone went home. A financial map that looked less like success and more like an escape room designed by an accountant with anger issues. It started with a transfer. $20,000 moved from a business operating account to a holding account I didn't recognize. The memo line was blank, no vendor name, no invoice. That's the kind of thing you can ignore once. Twice you circle it. By the fifth time, you start pulling reports you don't normally pull. I printed bank statements, I opened loan documents, I checked the property records the way you check an injury you're afraid to touch. And there it was, liens, loans, and signatures. The house, our forever home, had a first mortgage, then a second, then a third, each one taken out at a different time, each one framed as temporary liquidity. I did the math with a calculator I didn't trust because the numbers looked like someone else's nightmare. Total owed more than the house could sell for, not tight, not a little leveraged, but upside down. Oh, then the business. Hale Property had a line of credit that was always maxed, late vendor payments disguised as processing delays, back taxes with payment plans, equipment leases, software subscriptions, consulting fees to a firm that didn't exist on Google. And the weirdest part wasn't even the debt. It was where the money went. Crypto transfers, casino cash withdrawals small enough to hide, frequent enough to matter, hotel charges in a city Mason claimed he never visited, and a monthly rent payment to an address I didn't recognize. I drove there one afternoon after dropping Eli at school. A small apartment complex, beige and tired, the kind of place that smells like stale carpet and resignation. I sat in the car, hands tight on the steering wheel, and watched Mason's business trip door for 30 minutes. A woman came out carrying groceries, not Sloane, this was before Sloane. Another woman's. Another life. I didn't confront him. Not because I was scared, though I was. Not because I was passive, though that's what people assume. Because confronting Mason would have done exactly one thing, taught him to hide better. Men like him don't confess, they revise. So I acted like I didn't know. I kept my face calm at dinner, I nodded at his stories, I laughed at his jokes when clients were around. I played the role of supportive wife so well that even I started to forget it was a role. But behind the scenes, I did what my grandmother used to call quiet securing. My grandmother Ruth didn't trust charm, she trusted receipts. When she died, she left me an inheritance with one instruction in her will, for Mara alone. I kept it separate, not because I was plotting, because she taught me the difference between shared and swallowed. I also had my own retirement account from before I quit my job, modest but growing. Over time, between those two, I had built a safety net that did not touch Mason's money and did not have Mason's name anywhere near it. Then I did the most important thing, I documented. I scanned mortgage statements, I photographed loan contracts, I saved emails, I stored copies in 3 places. And then I waited. When Mason finally announced the divorce, it didn't feel like a shock. It felt like a timer going off. He thought I would fight for half the assets. He didn't realize the assets were glued to the liabilities. So I hired an attorney. Her name was Tessa Huang, 50-ish, sharp, and unimpressed by dramatic men in expensive suits. She listened while I explained what Mason was demanding: house, cars, business, everything, and she started to do the lawyer face, the one that says we're going to war. I can get you half, she said. We can force disclosures, we can request forensic accounting. You built this company with him. I leaned forward. What if I don't want half? Tessa blinked. What do you mean? I want clean, I said. I want out, I want Eli protected, and I want Mason to take what he keeps insisting he deserves. I slid a folder across her desk. Inside were the numbers. Inside was the truth. Tessa read without speaking for several minutes. Then she looked up, and this is when I knew she finally saw me. Her expression changed from pity to respect. You've known for years, she said. I've been preparing, I answered. And your separate funds. In a trust, I said. For Eli, irrevocable, my name isn't even the beneficiary. Tessa exhaled like someone who had just watched a magician reveal the trick. Okay, she said slowly, then we're not fighting for assets. We were setting a trap for assumptions. The plan was simple in concept and brutal in execution. Give Mason what he wanted, but make sure the paperwork made the cost unavoidable. We moved into a smaller apartment, Eli and me, with mismatched furniture and boxes stacked like a reminder that I'd been demoted from wife to inconvenience. Mason, meanwhile, posted pictures with Sloan, dinners, vacations, captions about new beginnings. People messaged me with sympathy, some with advice, a few with judgment. I let them. There's an advantage to being underestimated. Nobody watches your hands. Sloan redecorated my old living room. Claudia bragged to anyone who would listen that I got nothing. Mason smirked in mediation like a man who thinks the story ends with him. And every time he smiled, I reminded myself he wasn't winning. He was just signing. Mediation is where people go to pretend they're reasonable. Mason arrived to the first session in a suit that could have financed a semester of community college. He shook the mediator's hand like he was doing him a favor. Sloan wasn't allowed in the room, so she waited outside, and Mason kept glancing at his phone like she was his reward for finishing quickly. Tessa sat beside me, a legal pad open, pen ready. She looked like she could dismantle a man with punctuation. I looked like the opposite. I wore a plain sweater, no jewelry, hair tied back. I practiced the posture of someone who had stopped believing she deserved things. Because Mason needed to believe that story. The mediator reviewed our positions. Mason's attorney, a smooth man named Grant, spoke about maintaining stability and protecting the business. Translation: Mason gets everything. Tessa could have objected. She could have asked for valuations, audits, forced disclosures. She could have made Mason sweat. Instead, she waited for my cue. I cleared my throat, my voice shook right on schedule. I don't want to fight, I said. I just want enough to start over. Mason's eyebrows lifted, pleased. Grant's shoulders relaxed. The mediator asked what I wanted. 50,000, I whispered like it hurt to ask. Tessa's pen didn't move, but her eyes flicked to me, still sure. I gave a tiny nod. Mason almost smiled out loud. Fine, he said quickly, that's fair. Fair. He was taking the home, the company, the cars, and he called 50,000 fair like he was tossing me bus fare. But the mediator was happy. A quick settlement means less work. We built the agreement in layers. Layer 1 was the shiny part. Mason receives all marital assets. I relinquish claims. I receive my small settlement. Custody shared because Mason wanted to look like a good father even when he acted like Eli was luggage. Layer 2 was the part nobody reads, the liability schedule. Every mortgage tied to the house, every line of credit, every loan, every lease, every tax obligation. On paper, it was simply disclosure. In reality, it was the invoice for Mason's arrogance. Mason's attorney asked once carefully if we'd consider a forensic audit. Grant wasn't stupid. He knew something felt off. He could sense the smell of hidden debt the way firefighters smell smoke. But Mason shut it down before Grant could finish. No delays, Mason said. I know my company, I know my numbers. His attorney tried again later. I recommend independent valuation, Grant said gently, just to protect you. Mason laughed. Protect me from what, Mara? He said my name like it tasted funny. She can barely ask for money without crying. I lowered my gaze, let him have that image, let him build his confidence on it. Grant eventually produced a waiver, standard language stating that he advised financial review and Mason declined. Mason signed without reading. Because impatience makes people sloppy, and Mason was always impatient when he thought he'd already won. Outside the mediation room, Sloan hugged him like he'd conquered something noble. Claudia texted me later, a message dripping in sugar-coated cruelty. Hope you find a nice little place for you and Eli. Fresh starts are so healthy. I didn't respond. Then my phone buzzed with a call from a number I hadn't seen in years. Lena. My best friend since college. The person who had brought casseroles when Eli was born, who had sat at my kitchen table and told me I deserved better. She had been checking on me a lot lately, too much. How are you holding up? She asked, voice soft. Not great, I said and let my voice crack. Oh, Mara, Lena sighed, Mason is being so harsh. Within an hour, Mason texted, don't do anything stupid, let's be adults. That's when I knew Lena wasn't calling to help, she was calling to report. I'd suspected for weeks. The little coincidences were stacking up. Mason knowing things I hadn't said to him, his sudden preemptive comments, his random mentions of places I'd only told Lena about. It didn't hurt as much as it should have. Maybe because betrayal is less shocking when you've been watching a person practice selfishness for years. So I used it. I told Lena I was thinking about suing for the business. Mason's attorney emailed the next morning with concerns about my intentions. I told Lena I might seek full custody. Mason posted a photo with Eli and a caption about co-parenting with Grace. Lena thought she was controlling the narrative. She was just helping me steer Mason exactly where I wanted him. Meanwhile, Eli was noticing more than either of us realized. He didn't understand the paperwork, but he understood patterns. One night at the apartment, he stared at me from the table while I sorted mail. Mom, he said, is Dad actually rich? I paused. What do you think? I asked. He frowned. I think he's pretending. I reached for his hand and squeezed. Then you're smarter than most adults, I said. Are we going to be okay? I looked at him, the boy I'd been protecting quietly for years. We're going to be more than okay, I told him. Because the plan wasn't about revenge for me. It was about freedom for him. And Mason was about to sign the door shut behind me. The final hearing was in a courtroom that smelled like old paper and polished wood, the kind of place where people's lives get turned into files. Mason arrived first, of course. He stood with Grant, laughing too loudly, wearing a new watch that flashed when he moved his wrist. I wondered if he'd bought it with borrowed money. I didn't have to wonder long. He loved spending like debt was imaginary. Sloan waited outside the courtroom, scrolling on her phone, looking bored. Claudia sat behind Mason like a proud manager at a talent show. I walked in beside Tessa, plain dress, flat shoes, face calm. The judge, a woman with silver hair and tired eyes, reviewed the settlement and looked at me. Mrs. Ellison, she said, you understand you are relinquishing claim to substantial marital property. Yes, Your Honor. And you are doing so voluntarily. Oh, yes. She studied me. Judges have a sixth sense for coercion, for regret, for people who don't know what they're giving up. I let my shoulders droop just enough to look resigned. Very well, she said. Documents were passed, pages turned, pens clicked. Mason signed quickly, like he was anxious to get back to his victory lap. I signed slowly, not for drama, because every signature felt like a lock clicking into place. Grant reviewed the packet because good attorneys review. He reached the liability schedule. And that's when it happened. His eyes narrowed, he flipped back a page forward again. He traced a line with his finger, then inhaled sharply. His face changed, not anger, fear, the kind you get when you see the bottom drop out. Grant leaned in toward Mason and whispered 5 words. Just 5. You're taking all the debts. Mason didn't understand at first. His expression stayed smug for 1 extra second, like his brain refused to accept the sentence. Then he grabbed the pages and actually read. I watched the color drain from his face. House, multiple mortgages, total owed more than market value. Business, line of credit, vendor obligations, tax arrears. Vehicles, leases, balloon payments. Personal guarantees highlighted like a warning label. Everything he demanded came stapled to a financial bomb. Mason's hand began to shake. He looked at me like I'd committed a crime by letting him get what he asked for. This is wrong, he blurted, half standing. This is fraud. The judge's voice snapped. Mr. Hale, sit down. Mason sat, but his breath was ragged now. These numbers, she hid. Grant cut in carefully because he knew better than to let his client accuse without proof. Your Honor, he said, I advised Mr. Hale to pursue independent review. He declined. He handed over the waiver. The judge read it, looked at Mason. Is this your signature? Mason stared at the paper like it had insulted him. Yes, he said, barely audible. So you were advised, the judge said evenly. You chose not to verify, you understood you were signing a binding agreement. Mason's voice cracked. I didn't know. The judge didn't soften. Mr. Hale, you are an adult represented by counsel. Ignorance of your own financial obligations is not a legal argument. He turned to me, eyes wide, desperate, furious. You knew, he whispered. I met his gaze without flinching. I managed your books for 12 years, I said quietly. What did you think I knew? For the first time, Mason looked like a man who realized his charm wasn't currency here. He tried again. I want to withdraw. The judge shook her head. The settlement stands, marriage dissolved. The gavel sounded like a door closing. I didn't celebrate in the courtroom, I didn't smirk, I didn't throw a line for the audience. I simply stood, gathered my bag, and walked out. In the hallway, Sloane looked up as Mason stormed out, papers in hand. She smiled until she saw his face. He started speaking fast, explaining, blaming, trying to patch the story back together. Sloane's smile slid off her face like makeup in rain. Claudia stood, frozen, her mouth open. Her eyes darted between the papers and her son like she was trying to calculate how embarrassment becomes bankruptcy. I kept walking. Outside, the air was bright, ordinary, birds, traffic, sunlight. The world didn't care about Mason's collapse. And that was the most beautiful part. Mason's downfall wasn't dramatic at first. It was administrative. Banks calling, vendors emailing, payment plans missed, final notices stacking like bricks. Sloane lasted 12 days. 12. She moved out of the house while Mason was at a meeting, leaving behind a single sticky note on the counter. I can't do this. Claudia called me once, voice trembling, trying to sound dignified. Mara, she said, I didn't realize, none of us realized. That was the point, Claudia. Mason tried to sell the house, but you can't sell your way out of negative equity without admitting what you are. Real estate agents suggested a short sale. Mason refused. His pride could not survive the word short. The business began hemorrhaging clients. Some left because the service got worse, some left because rumors spread. Success is magnetic, but failure is louder. Then lawsuits came. Vendors filed claims. Former partners demanded payment. A letter from the tax authority arrived that made Mason's hands shake again, according to Eli, who heard him yelling on a phone call. Mason blamed everyone. Me, the market, his attorney, bad luck. He never once blamed himself. Eli started to see it. Kids don't need balance sheets to understand hypocrisy. They just need repetition. Mason told him there was no money for school trips while wearing a watch that cost more than rent. He talked about responsibility while skipping his own obligations. And one evening, Eli said something that made my throat tighten. "I don't want to be like him," he whispered. I sat beside him on the couch in our small apartment and chose my words carefully. "You don't have to be," I said. "You get to decide what kind of man you become." He nodded, eyes wet but steady. "Are we safe?" I thought about the trust, about the documents, about the planning that had felt like loneliness while I was doing it. "Yes," I told him, "we're safe." With my small settlement, I did boring things that felt like miracles. Paid deposits, bought groceries without calculating every item, bought Eli a new backpack instead of a used one. And I went back to the version of myself I'd paused. I enrolled in evening courses, design, drafting, project management, not because I wanted to glow up, not because I wanted revenge success photos, because I wanted a life that didn't depend on someone else's approval. My first client was a woman named Jo, recently divorced, standing in an empty apartment holding a paint swatch like it was a lifeline. "What color do you start with?" she asked. I thought about my own kitchen, the one Mason let Sloan repaint a sterile gray. "Something that feels like breath," I said, "something that doesn't apologize for being alive." We painted her bedroom a soft green. She cried and laughed at the same time. "I forgot I could choose," she said. I understood exactly what she meant. 3 months after court, Mason showed up at my door. He looked smaller, not in body but in presence, like debt had eaten his confidence first. "Mara," he said, voice rough, "can we talk?" I stayed in the doorway. "I made mistakes," he continued quickly, like if he spoke fast enough he could outrun consequences. "I didn't know it was that bad, I didn't mean." "You meant to leave," I said. "You meant to take everything." His eyes flashed. "I didn't mean to lose everything." There it was, the honest sentence. He swallowed, softer now. "I need help." I looked at him, the man I'd organized, supported, excused, and carried. "No," I said. He blinked as if the word didn't compute. "You asked for everything," I continued calm. "I gave it to you. I'm done paying your bills with my life." "Amara, please." "Goodbye, Mason." I closed the door. Through the peephole, I watched him stand there for a long time, like a man waiting for the world to reverse itself. Oh, it didn't. Later that night, after Eli fell asleep, I placed my grandmother's old cookbook on the counter. It was worn at the edges, stained in places, like a record of meals made for people who didn't always deserve them. I ran my fingers over the cover and whispered into the quiet. "You were right about everything." Because the victory wasn't Mason's panic in court. The victory was the silence afterward, the kind that finally belongs to you. And for the first time in years, my life felt like mine.